Margaret Wilson clutched her worn leather purse tightly against her chest as she stood in line at First National Bank. At 82, every trip outside her small apartment was becoming an ordeal, but today's errand couldn't be postponed. Her Social Security check needed to be deposited, and the automatic deposit system had somehow failed again this month. She needed that money for her medications. The bank lobby buzzed with the typical Friday afternoon rush. Young professionals checked their watches impatiently, bank tellers typed with mechanical precision, and security guards maintained their stoic presence near the entrance. Margaret's arthritic fingers fumbled with her deposit slip as the line inched forward. 3 people ahead of her now. She'd been standing for nearly 20 minutes, and her back was beginning to throb. "Next customer, please," called a teller with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret watched as a man in an expensive suit strode confidently to the counter, bypassing the elderly woman who had been waiting at the front of the line. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. "I believe I was next." The man barely glanced at her. "I have an appointment," he stated flatly, placing his briefcase on the counter. The teller hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Of course, Mr. Harrington. How can I help you today?" Margaret sighed. This was the way of the world now, she thought. Always rushing, no time for courtesy, especially toward the elderly who moved too slowly for modern life. She leaned more heavily on her cane and tried to ignore the growing pain in her hip. 20 minutes later, Margaret finally reached the front of the line. The afternoon had advanced, and the bank would be closing in half an hour. She approached the counter with careful steps, her cane tapping against the polished marble floor. "I need to deposit this check, please," Margaret said, sliding her Social Security check and deposit slip across the counter. The young teller, her name tag read Ashley, glanced at the check and then at Margaret. "Do you have your ID, ma'am?" Margaret nodded, opening her purse to retrieve her wallet. Her fingers, stiff with arthritis, struggled with the clasp. "Ma'am, there's a line forming," Ashley remarked, her tone carrying a hint of impatience. "I'm sorry, dear. Just give me a moment." Margaret's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she continued to struggle with her wallet. Behind her, someone sighed loudly. Margaret's hands trembled more, making her task even harder. "Perhaps you could step aside and organize your things?" Ashley suggested, not unkindly but clearly eager to move the line along. "I just need another moment," Margaret said, finally extracting her ID card and handing it over with shaking fingers. Ashley examined the ID, then looked back at Margaret with a frown. "This expired 3 months ago, ma'am. I can't accept it for identification purposes." Margaret's heart sank. "But I've been coming to this bank for over 40 years. Surely you can make an exception? I'm only depositing my Social Security check." Ashley's expression hardened slightly. "I'm sorry, but bank policy requires current identification. Rules are rules." "Could I speak to a manager, please?" Margaret asked quietly, aware of the growing line behind her. Ashley hesitated, then picked up her phone. After a brief conversation, she said, "Our assistant manager will be with you shortly. Please step aside so I can help the next customer." Humiliation washed over Margaret as she shuffled away from the counter, feeling like a scolded child. She found a corner near the desk marked Customer Service and waited, leaning heavily on her cane. From where she stood, she could see other customers being served efficiently, their transactions completed in minutes. No one looked her way. The assistant manager, a young man in his 30s with slicked back hair and an air of self-importance, eventually approached. "Miss Wilson," he asked, consulting a tablet, "I understand there's an issue with your identification." Margaret explained her situation, how her license had expired, how she hadn't been able to renew it because she no longer drove, how she'd been a loyal customer for decades. The assistant manager, whose name badge read Kevin, listened with practiced patience before shaking his head. "I understand your frustration, but we have strict protocols in place for security reasons. Without current ID, I can't authorize this transaction. Perhaps a family member could help you get a state ID card?" "My only family is my niece in Oregon," Margaret said quietly. "I don't have anyone to help me with these things anymore." Kevin's expression remained professionally sympathetic but unmoved. "Then I suggest contacting social services. They might have programs to assist seniors with transportation and documentation issues. Margaret felt tears welling in her eyes. The thought of calling yet another government office, waiting on hold for hours, explaining her situation to indifferent voices, it was overwhelming. "What about my check?" she asked. "I need that money for my medications." "I'm sorry, but without proper ID, we can't process this deposit today." Kevin was already glancing toward the entrance where more customers were arriving before closing time. Margaret stood there, clutching her purse and her undeposited check, feeling invisible and worthless. The bank continued to operate around her, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, cash drawers opening and closing. No one seemed to notice the elderly woman with tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. That's when the bank's glass doors swung open and a man walked in. He wasn't particularly tall, perhaps 5'9", with shoulder-length dark hair streaked with silver. He wore worn jeans, motorcycle boots, and a simple black blazer over a gray t-shirt. Dark sunglasses covered his eyes, but there was something about his bearing, a quiet confidence, an aura of gentle strength, that caused several heads to turn. Margaret didn't recognize him at first. Her vision wasn't what it used to be, and she was distracted by her own distress. But she noticed how the energy in the room shifted when he removed his sunglasses and approached the customer service desk where she stood. "Excuse me," he said in a voice that was surprisingly soft yet carried clearly. "Is there a problem here?" Kevin's professional demeanor faltered for a moment. "No problem, sir. Just explaining some policy requirements to this customer. How can I help you today?" The man glanced at Margaret, taking in her tear-filled eyes and trembling hands. "Actually," he said, "I think there is a problem." He turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, what seems to be the issue?" Before Margaret could answer, Kevin interjected. "Sir, due to customer privacy protocols, I can't discuss another client's situation with—" "I'm asking the lady," the man interrupted gently but firmly. "Not you." There was something in his tone, not aggression, but a quiet authority, that silenced Kevin immediately. Margaret looked up at the stranger, surprised by his interest. "They won't let me deposit my Social Security check because my ID is expired. I've been coming to this bank for 40 years, but they say rules are rules." The man nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Kevin. 40 years of loyalty doesn't earn some flexibility?" Kevin straightened his tie. "Sir, I understand your concern, but bank regulations regarding identification are federal requirements. We can't make exceptions." "Actually," the man said, "banks make exceptions every day. It's called customer service." His voice remained calm, almost soothing, but there was an intensity in his dark eyes that made Kevin shift uncomfortably. By now, several customers and bank employees had begun to recognize the stranger. Whispers of, "Is that—" "It can't be," rippled through the lobby. A young teller fumbled and dropped a stack of deposit slips. The security guard near the door stood a little straighter. The man seemed either unaware of or unbothered by the growing recognition. His focus remained entirely on Margaret's situation. "What's your name?" he asked her gently. "Margaret Wilson," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I'm Keanu," he said, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Margaret." Margaret shook his hand, still not fully comprehending who he was, but grateful for his kindness. "Thank you for stopping, young man. Most people wouldn't bother." Keanu smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed his face. "We all need someone to notice us sometimes." He turned back to Kevin, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. "So, about Ms. Wilson's check." "As I explained," Kevin began, his voice slightly higher than before, "without current identification." "You've known this customer for 40 years, Keanu interrupted. "You have her account information, her address, her signature on file. You can verify her identity without requiring a plastic card with an arbitrary expiration date." The bank had gone eerily quiet. Even customers in line had stopped their conversations to watch the scene unfolding. A woman in the back had discreetly taken out her phone and appeared to be recording. Kevin glanced nervously toward the bank manager's office. "I'll have to consult with my superior." "That sounds like an excellent idea," Keanu agreed, his voice still pleasant but brooking no argument. As Kevin hurried away, Keanu turned back to Margaret. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair beside her. Margaret nodded, and they both sat down. "You know, Keanu said conversationally. I had a grandmother who used to face the same challenges. Getting older in a world that moves faster every day isn't easy. No, it isn't, Margaret agreed, studying his face. You look familiar, young man. Have we met before? Keanu smiled again. I don't think so. I have one of those faces people think they recognize. Before Margaret could respond, the bank manager emerged from his office, followed by Kevin. The manager, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and glasses, approached with an extended hand and a broad smile. Mr. Reeves, what an unexpected honor. I'm David Thornton, the branch manager. Is there something we can help you with today? Keanu stood but didn't take the offered hand immediately. Yes, David, you can help Ms. Wilson deposit her Social Security check without further delay or distress. The manager blinked, then looked at Margaret as if seeing her for the first time. Of course, absolutely. Kevin explained the situation. While we do have strict protocols, which I'm sure can accommodate a 40-year customer, Keanu interjected smoothly. Yes, of course. The manager turned to Margaret. Miss Wilson, please accept my apologies for any inconvenience. We value your loyalty, and I'll personally handle your transaction right away. Margaret looked between the manager and Keanu, finally understanding who her defender was. You're that actor, she said softly to Keanu, the one from those action movies my late husband used to enjoy. Keanu nodded with a self-deprecating smile. Guilty as charged. Why would someone like you help someone like me? Margaret asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Keanu's expression turned serious. Because kindness doesn't need a reason, Margaret, and because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, especially those who've lived long enough to teach the rest of us a thing or two about resilience. The manager cleared his throat. Miss Wilson, if you'll come with me, I'll take care of your deposit right away, and we'll make a note in your account so this doesn't happen again. Margaret stood slowly, leaning on her cane. She looked at Keanu. Thank you, she said simply. My pleasure, he replied. Would you like me to wait until your transaction is complete? I could walk you out afterward if you'd like. Margaret's eyes widened slightly at the offer. You would do that? Of course. The manager led Margaret to his private office, where he processed her deposit with efficiency and deference that had been notably absent earlier. Through the glass walls, she could see Keanu waiting patiently in the lobby, politely declining selfie requests from other customers while maintaining a friendly demeanor. When Margaret emerged with her deposit receipt safely tucked in her purse, Keanu stood. All set? He asked. She nodded. All taken care of. The manager even set up automatic deposits for future checks so I won't have to come in person. Good, Keanu said. How are you getting home, Margaret? The bus, she replied. There's a stop just around the corner. Keanu glanced at his watch. Would you allow me to call you a car service, or I could give you a ride if you prefer? Margaret hesitated. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Keanu assured her. Actually, I was about to grab some coffee. Maybe you'd join me? I'd enjoy the company. Something in his tone told Margaret he was being sincere. This wasn't charity or pity. He genuinely wanted to continue their conversation. I haven't had a proper cup of coffee with company in quite some time, she admitted. That would be lovely. As they walked toward the exit, the bank staff and customers watched in amazement. The manager hurried forward to hold the door open for them. Thank you again for your business, Miss Wilson, he said effusively. And Mr. Reeves, it was an honor to meet you. Keanu nodded politely but said nothing. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Keanu offered his arm to Margaret, who took it gratefully. They walked slowly, matching her pace, toward a small cafe on the corner. You know, Margaret said as they walked, what happened in there? Your kindness. That means more than you can imagine. When you get to my age, you start to feel invisible. Keanu listened thoughtfully. I think people of all ages can feel invisible sometimes. We're all just looking for connection, for someone to see us as we really are. That's very wise for someone so young, Margaret remarked with a smile. Keanu laughed. I'm not that young anymore, Margaret, and wisdom isn't always correlated with age. Some people learn life's important lessons early, others never learn them at all. They reached the cafe and found a quiet table by the window. After ordering a black coffee for Keanu and a tea with honey for Margaret, They fell into conversation as naturally as old friends. Margaret told Keanu about her late husband, their 52 years of marriage, her career as a school librarian, and her struggles navigating life alone in her 80s. Keanu spoke about his love of motorcycles, his passion for reading, and some amusing stories from film sets, carefully avoiding any hint of Hollywood gossip or name-dropping. "You're not what I expected," Margaret admitted as they finished their drinks. "From a movie star, I mean." "What did you expect?" Keanu asked, genuinely curious. "Someone more," she searched for the word. "Entitled, I suppose. Someone who wouldn't notice an old woman having trouble at the bank." Keanu's expression turned reflective. "Fame is just circumstance, Margaret. It doesn't define character. Some of the most remarkable people I've ever met live ordinary lives away from any spotlight." "Like your grandmother you mentioned?" "Exactly like her," Keanu nodded. "She taught me that true strength isn't about physical power or social status. It's about how you handle life's challenges with grace." When it was time to leave, Keanu insisted on calling a car service to take Margaret home. As they waited outside the cafe, he asked for her phone number. "I'd like to check in on you sometime, if that's all right," he explained. "Maybe have coffee again when I'm in town." Margaret was touched by the gesture, even though part of her suspected he was just being kind and would likely forget about her once they parted ways. The car arrived, and Keanu opened the door for her. "Thank you for sharing your afternoon with me, Margaret. It's been a pleasure." "The pleasure was all mine," she replied, settling into the back seat. "And thank you for what you did at the bank. Not many would have intervened like that." "More should," he said simply. "Take care of yourself, Margaret." As the car pulled away, Margaret watched through the rear window as Keanu waved once, then turned and walked down the street, his hands in his pockets. Just an ordinary man who had done an extraordinary thing, reminding an invisible old woman that she mattered. 3 weeks later, Margaret was surprised to receive a delivery, a beautiful potted orchid, and a note that read, "Thinking of you. Coffee again soon, Kay." And true to his word, whenever Keanu was in town over the following years, he would call Margaret and arrange to meet for coffee or lunch. Sometimes they visited art galleries. Once they attended a symphony performance. He introduced her to his friends without fanfare, simply as "my friend Margaret." Their unlikely friendship became something Margaret treasured, a reminder that kindness can appear in the most unexpected places, and that being seen, truly seen, is perhaps the greatest gift one human can offer another. The story of what happened at the bank that day eventually made its way to social media, of course. Someone had recorded part of the interaction on their phone. But neither Margaret nor Keanu ever discussed it publicly. For them, it wasn't about viral moments or public recognition. It was about what happens when someone chooses to notice another person's distress and decides, in that moment, that nothing is more important than offering kindness. And in a world that often moves too fast, where the elderly can become invisible and celebrities are expected to live in bubbles of privilege, their friendship stood as quiet testimony to a simple truth. We are all just people, making our way through life, and sometimes, if we're lucky, crossing paths with others who remind us of our shared humanity. For Margaret Wilson, what began as a humiliating experience at a bank became the start of an unexpected friendship that enriched her final years. And for Keanu Reeves, it was just another day of living by the philosophy that had guided him through fame and fortune. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Years later, after Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, a small obituary appeared in the local paper. Among those listed as mourners was simply her friend, Keanu. No last name needed, no mention of celebrity, just a friend saying goodbye to another friend. And perhaps that, in the end, was the most remarkable part of their story. Not that a famous actor had stepped in to help an elderly woman being mistreated at a bank, but that two humans had recognized in each other something worth knowing, worth protecting, worth the investment of time and care. In a world that too often values youth over experience, wealth over wisdom, and social status over character, their friendship stood as quiet rebellion. A reminder that the most valuable currency we possess is not fame or fortune, but our capacity for connection, for empathy, for seeing one another clearly across the divides of age, background, and circumstance. And in that bank, on that ordinary Friday afternoon, when an elderly woman stood humiliated and invisible, what truly mattered wasn't that Keanu Reeves was famous. What mattered was that he noticed, he stopped, and he chose to act with kindness. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, or at the very least, to make an unbearable moment bearable, to remind someone that they still exist in the eyes of others, to transform humiliation into dignity with nothing more than attention and respect. For Margaret Wilson, that was everything. For Keanu Reeves, it was simply the right thing to do. And for everyone who witnessed it or heard the story afterward, it was a powerful reminder that we all have daily opportunities to choose kindness over indifference, to see those who feel invisible, to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. In the end, that may be the most enduring legacy of what happened that day at the bank. Not the viral moment or the celebrity encounter, but the quiet invitation to notice the Margarets in our own lives and to ask ourselves, what would we do? Would we walk past, or would we stop and say, "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" Because in that choice lies the measure of who we truly are, famous or not.